Hello! Today we're looking at a new plane from Zohd. It's not really a new plane as such, it's a new version of it. This is the Zohd Drift and this is the Dark Breeze edition, which basically means the foam is black instead of white. I'm excited about Zohd because my most flown plane, and you might think it's this one because it's the only one you can see, but further back there's loads of planes. But my most flown plane is this one. This is the original Zohd Dart, and obviously I've put FPV gear in. And the reason I fly it so much is it's so convenient. Everything's magnetic. These come off, the wings come off, and there's just a spar. So when I finished, I take the entire thing apart and I put all the bits back in a box for storage. It's so simple, it's so easy to move and transport around. So I'm kind of going into this thinking, I hope this is the same as this. I mean, there are some slight differences. This, you could do stuff with it. It runs off FreeS. I ran it on a FreeS 1300, that lasts about half an hour. But you know, you can do stupid things with it. You can loop it and roll it, and we bounce these things off all sorts. Whenever me and my friend go out and we've got our darts, things escalate and eventually somebody's plane goes home in a bag because we're just crashing into trees and larking about. But they all go back together brilliantly. This one, on the other hand, is much more beginner build. It doesn't suggest you do any aerobatics or really work it hard. It runs on 2S or FreeS, and FreeS it runs on a tiny little 3-inch prop. So it's much more set up for a beginner, for cruising quite slowly, for being gentle, a nice introduction on how to fly things. So I'm looking quite forward to seeing what's inside. I'm just going to quickly get the bits out and then we'll go through it in more detail about how you put these things together and what's happening. Well, it seems to be a very similar sort of thing. It involves you get all these pieces of dark foam. So you know what, let's go into close up, we'll have a better look at what these are and we'll put it together. Okay, in the box. Now normally I would do this with a white background so it's all nice, but I figure this is going to be pretty big and so you just have to make do with my carpet. What I'm just going to do is get it all out of the bags first, see what we've got, and see where we go from there. Okay, so you get the two wings and they've already got the servo and control rods installed there. They've got a section that enters the body there. That's all pretty nice. You've got the elevator. It's got a little control surface ready on there, but obviously not joined up at the moment. And you've got this piece, which is like a piece of carbon and a great big push rod here with a clevis that obviously fits on this bit, and then that bit goes somewhere else. And then you've got this bit, which obviously has the little motor. The motor is a 1406 2600. It is tiny, and you've got a couple of flaps here that got the servo plugs and power coming out, and that looks like where the battery goes. You've got another one here. I think this is intended to have the little Zohd, what was it called? It had this little kind of basic autopilot which did like a return to home and something. That looks like it's got the GPS ready there and something to go in there. Got a little bits of hardware. You've got this little, another piece of carbon there, a couple of thumb screws, some sort of Velcro stuff. Then you've got two props, this little 3-bladed 3x3 prop, and this is I think a 5x5. The idea of this is for 2S, that's for 3S, because you don't want to put too many watts through this motor. You've got some stickers here. What it didn't come with is any instructions, so I went on the website and I went and printed out the instructions from the website. This isn't specifically for the Dark Edition, but this is just a Drift, and it tells me that what I didn't know is there's another little section in the main body of the plane where you put this servo rod through. That looks kind of a bit fiddly, but it's talking about this bit here. If we do that, open up here, we've got access to a servo, and you can see the slightly enlarged hole there. So we have to feed that control rod into there and get it in that bit. So we've got our ESC there, nicely stuck on. So we've got some space to put stuff if we want to. But let's try and put this thing together. We'll start with, I guess, the trickier section of this bit, because the rest of it looks pretty easy. So we're basically going to feed this through here and join it to the servo. There's going to be a certain amount done off camera because I can't see through my camera to push this in properly. So hopefully if you can see inside, we've got the metal rod down there, and basically this little plastic bit then does that with quite a nice satisfying click. After that point, that bit pushes in, that bit just does this one little screw, and that's the tail on nicely there. Pretty easy to put together, just a little bit fiddlier than simply snapping things on. Next thing we do is put the tail on here, and wow, this is dark, isn't it? Really hard to see. Before we actually put the clevers on, you will notice there's this little hole here for this thumb screw to go up and hold that on, so that goes up and everything holds together so it can't go out. So I'm just going to screw that bit in first. So there's that screw in. I would actually do this before putting this tail on because it's much easier to move this out of the way, but that's a question for another time, I guess. And with this then connected, we're just going to put the little clevers through the hole here and then snap that shut, which looks like that, if it's going to focus. Yeah, all good there. So that's that part done. Next, the wings, which should be the easiest bit. There's a slightly non-obvious structure there. At first I thought it was missing it, but it's just, you can see the little carbon fibre rod through the centre, which goes through this hole here. And you see you've got the electrical contacts there for the wings to go on to join the servos up, so these should go in pretty easy. Make sure we get it all lined up. Apologies if you can't see, I need to see what I'm doing as well. That's that one, and that's that one. So that's both wings in. I told you I'd need more space. And what you've also got here is a small hole which we're just going to put another thumb screw in, and that's just going to make sure the wings can't possibly fall off whilst we're flying around. And there's the whole thing. It's not too big, as you can see. Fairly small. I forget what the wingspan is, but now we've got to figure out what to do about putting a receiver in and getting a battery sorted out. I find it kind of interesting that if you look in here, there is a JST plug and an XT30, and I had a look and they both connect to the ESC. So you've got two types of battery connectors. Now normally we'd say things like, oh, JST won't take much power for it, but this is pretty gentle. It's got a single motor. It's going to be not a problem of flying it around at the amount of amps that's going to get drawn. We've got all the servos to connect here to a receiver, and as I said, you've got this little pre-made hole and this tiny little slot here just for one of those all-in-one cameras, which is the antenna that comes straight up. So you've got the option of running it 2S or 3S. I think it talks about going up to about 800, 900 on a 3S, or up to about 1500 on a 2S. And I've got bits of both, so I might try with both, see how we go. I want to try this line of sight first, but I'm not great line of sight, so I'll see if I've got one of those little all-in-one cameras ready. I'm thinking I might just go a regular FreeSky receiver. Normally everything I fly now is Express LRS, but I've only got one other PWM Express LRS receiver that I want to use in something else. And this is by no means distance or anything like that, so it shouldn't be a problem just running it on something normal. And obviously I've got no flight controller in there anyway, so I tend not to go too far if I can't hit a switch and expect it to come back home. And the whole idea of this is just nice gentle flyer. You fly it around the field nice and slow, nice cruisy thing. You get to learn what's happening and how to fly something without, you know, the worry of it running away with you. The all-out weight of this with the battery, with their recommended range, should be under 250 grams. So that'd be interesting to test it, because it obviously opens up a lot more opportunities depending where you are in the world. Anyway, I'm going to find a receiver and try and configure this up, and I'll show you what I got. Okay, so I found out some interesting things here, because I thought, oh, I've got these little 3S 800 milliamp hour batteries, that's about right for that. And I thought, I'll plug this into the JST. But then I found that the JST is male. And I think this is because Zohd do this camera that has a female JST connector and can take like 5 to whatever volts, and is probably going to fit in there nicely. So what I've had to do is put in a little adapter to use these with the XT30. But if we now start this guy up, we should have ailerons, elevator, throttle. No rudder on this one, it is just a 3-channel plane. And what I've done, I've just chucked in a little FreeSky X4R head kicking about, which has 4 servo inputs, so that's going to work okay. I hit a bit of a snag on thinking about like the camera and VTX for that. What I thought was, hey, I've got a bunch of these little all-in-one units. But when I came down to try and fit this in, the problem is if you look at where the hole is and you look where the camera would align, the big skew antenna we got would be in the body, which is a problem. And I haven't got any which either have a pluggable antenna or something I can remove to take out there, which is annoying. And it is really a small hole, so not many cameras fit, so I'm going to have a bit of a think about that. There's also a real lack of small all-in-ones like this that run off anything other than 5 volts. So I can't simply take the tap off that like their own camera. So that's a bit more thought. But we're just about ready to fly, line of sight at least. This balances out nicely. Haven't tried the 2S stuff yet, but yeah, ready to go, and we'll see what we can do about a camera. Well, we've got something in there, kind of. This is something I hadn't tested out. I meant to, but I didn't get around to it. It's called the Oscar's Backpack. And the camera's not called Oscar's Backpack, I forgot what it is. But the idea, this was developed in conjunction with Oscar Lang by AKK. And it's this little backpack, and the idea is it fits onto cameras as a backpack. I mean, there's some odd things with it. It's kind of like, you'd think the camera would come with a special cable for it. It's got some really fiddly little cables. For some reason, the backpack never came with an antenna. I had to provide my own. And because it's off-center, I had to cut a little bit of the foam away here, and this bit being over on the side and up a bit more is a bit of a pain. So really, if you want less hassle, and what I've had to do is run this off the back by running a servo lead into the receiver, which is maybe not the best thing, but it doesn't seem to take much power, and I've had a test of it running the motors and all the servos, and everything seems okay. So hopefully. If you want less hassle, then just get the Zohd all-in-one camera and it plugs straight into there. Everything I had in tiny cameras would only take 5 volts, and getting 5 volts when you haven't got any flight control or anything is a bit of a pain. I did use a separate ESC here before. It was a little plush 6 amp, and that just overheated horrendously, so fingers crossed this is going to be okay. But we're ready to fly now. Let's pop that back in. So all we need now is a slightly less windy day, and we'll go and take this, try line of sight, try FPV, see what happens. Join me after this jump cut. Okay, we are ready to fly. It's a little bit blustery, much windier than it was advertised on the weather forecast. A little bit worried about that, especially with this quite slow plane and tiny prop, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to try it line of sight. If it survives, and you know, I'm hopeful it will, then yeah, we'll try FPV with this little camera in the front there. So batteries in there, it seems to balance out okay. It's just a question of can I fly it line of sight very well, and is it going to be too windy? I also found the added problem that I bought this radio. Not a bad radio, it works fine, and I bought it because it does FreeSky and ELRS, and I got another thing to fly later, but it doesn't have any trim tabs. And this is a plane with no flight controller, which I will probably have to trim out, which kind of screws me up a bit, but I'll figure something out. Anyway, let's get flying. Whoa. The plane looks generally okay. Oh, we need a touch of expo in there. Hit that wind and it was not very happy. Oh, but yeah, just trying to get it to start reacting quite as much. Might need some rates in as well. Whoa. Rates needed, desperately needed. So what I've got at the moment is far too much control authority. Just the gentlest reaction. Well, this thing will just go up and down really fast. Hey, I know it will do aerobatics in my accidental roll. Not suggested on this plane, apparently. Let's put a yaw rate on the controller. So let's try it 50% first. See what happens. Oh, typically the wind dies down then. That's not a bad thing.
into the sun, can't see what I'm doing. Oh, that was bad. I'm not doing brilliantly in line of sight. It's kind of like I give it less authority and then I've got less action to pull up. I'm a bit worried about these branches, so I'm just going to try a quick FPV, see if I can do better at least.
Now, you may think it's a little bit weird that I'm flying FPV before I've really got this thing sorted out about what it's doing. But the specific reason for it is I don't have to concentrate as much in FPV. I kind of know what I'm doing a lot more, whereas all my concentration in line of sight is put into trying to keep the plane in the air. Not very well, I have to say. But as soon as I launched this in FPV, I figured out what the problem was, because now I can sort of see what I'm doing and I can fly without really thinking about it too much. I noticed that I was having to pull down on the elevator all the time. You might have noticed in line of sight it was porpoising, and that's because every time I let go of the elevator stick it would start to dive down. So obviously what I needed is some up trim, but of course I don't have any trim tabs on this radio because I was very stupid and took this radio out. So I needed to figure out a way of adding some up trim to it. But what I did, I flew around for a little bit and that was all fine, so I brought it on down and tried to sort out a way of adding some up.
So I've manually using the offset control given a little bit of up on the elevator because I noticed I was way back on the sticks in FPV, and we'll give it another go line of sight. It's still a bit breezy to say the least, so one more try before I give up and admit I cannot fly unless I'm in absolute perfect conditions.
Before I went for a line of sight flight, I thought I'd just do this in FPV again, just in case there's any problems, and I'll be able to rescue it easy. This was all fine apart from one problem. I normally do my recording in my PowerPlay DVR, but I always do a backup recording in my goggles, and I noticed the goggle recording wasn't going, so I attempted to start it by pressing the button. Unfortunately, this button, if you hold it down too long, puts it into DVR mode and wants to do playback, which is what happens here. So it's kind of like it's half trying to display the playback and half trying to show me my actual flight path. So I'm trying desperately to land this, and I'm using the sort of shadow and hoping this comes down safely, which fortunately it did.
Well, this is definitely better. I wish I had a bit of a wider field for when it comes around here. Trying not to have it go behind me and doing a turn that doesn't seem insane is a little bit tricky. Most of this is absolutely my fault. It's just that wind blows it back in so quickly, and I don't want to get it too high in case it blows away somewhere. Yeah, but to say I can't actually trim it properly, it's flying very nicely, even in this quite nasty wind. It's far more wind than we want for it, but beggars can't be choosers in these sort of days. I mean, the thing that would be most handy is a radio with trims. I can't believe I managed to bring this radio. Out of all the radios I own, we got this one. Really does lose some height on the turn there. Well, we're about 50% throttle, and that's enough to actually cut through this wind. It's just a bit scary on the downwind section because I haven't got that much space in this field. We've got a lot of trees either side of us, which could be better. But yeah, much happier now. Now we've done a bit of weird manual offsetting to trim the elevator better. Nice and smooth now. It's just free channel, of course, ailerons and elevator. Shame really, I could really do have a rudder right now to make the turns just a little bit flatter and a little bit less scary, but here's what it is. That turn there is frightening as me. But yeah, once you get the surfaces kind of worked out, it's quite a nice gentle flyer. And by that I mean really got to reduce the rates. These are at 50%, and that's plenty. Looks a bit bumpy here because of course that wind is absolutely murdering me. We've just got a really big gust there. Yeah, this is just over 50% throttle, and this seems to be a little sweet spot. So it flies slow enough so you can easily keep it in view. It's enough to cut through the sort of moderate winds that I'm dealing with here. Where am I going? I've gone the wrong way. Yep, I just go and look in the sun for no reason. I've gone past myself. Yeah, I mean it's about as much as I like to do on a line of sight, so I'm going to try and bring this in for an actual landing this time, not just crash it. Which may be somewhere away from me. Oh, does want to stall a little bit. Here he comes. Oh, now it's going to glide forever. Gliding, gliding, gliding. It's got quite a glide profile. Okay. I actually meant to land that one. I mean, to say I've dunked this down onto the ground quite a few times, it's remarkably clear of any blemishes. That's good news. I like it. Now let's see if I can fly FPV without accidentally turning my DVR on halfway around.
So here's what I'd call FPV on purpose, as opposed to just using FPV to try and diagnose the problems. And at this point I'm pretty happy that everything is flying fairly smoothly on the plane. Absolute joy finally to fly in line of sight. And now I'm going up for a little FPV flight. Now with this, I was still a little bit nervous. You shouldn't really take an FPV camera off the back of the ESC. I was a little bit worried that I was perhaps trying to draw too much, but it was running all this time because it was still plugged in all the time I was flying, and I didn't have any issues with, you know, servos locking out or anything. So I figured the amount of amps that was being drawn was absolutely fine. That said, I still wasn't going to go too far, because this is just a little light plane, and it was pretty downwindy up there, especially downwind. You really did shift. We're only on a little 25 milliwatt VTX as well. It would actually go up to 200 this, but I wanted to keep it at 25 just to make sure I wasn't drawing too much power. And I only had little FreeSky antennas which are all tucked in the plane because I figured I was keeping it in quite close. But yeah, it flies absolutely nicely in FPV. The camera's doing actually an alright job. As I said, I had this camera and VTX some time ago to review, and I never quite got round to it because I ended up not having anything to put it in. It was a bit of an odd shape and a bit of an odd design, but it seems to be doing okay. That said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for this plane. I still think the path of least resistance is to buy Zohd's own camera, because I think it has an OSD as well, which gives you your power as well, which would be quite useful. In terms of flight time, I was flying these batteries somewhere between sort of 15-20 minutes, and when I got them home they were on about 3.85 volts, so you know, it still had some way to go. It doesn't take a lot of power to fly this little plane, and that said, you wouldn't get that much out of it if you went full throttle everywhere instead of the sort of 50% throttle which I was doing. As mentioned before, this is a slow flying sort of chill out plane. It's just designed for sort of flying around. You could certainly fly it further. You could put a little autopilot in there if you wanted to, but the idea of this plane is it's a little beginner plane, and thus if you put FPV on it, it's, you know, it's a simple thing, and you probably wouldn't want to go too far on your first times out, and just flying around a field like this is probably what you'd get up to. But yeah, I was quite happy with the VTX and the camera. That seemed well. I need to come back and fly this when it's not quite so windy, just so it'd be a little bit smoother. Obviously it gets bounced around quite a lot by the wind, and my goodness, just trying to land this thing anywhere near me is near impossible. I sort of get down close to where I think I am, and the thing just glides and glides and glides, which is a great thing. I think it'd be, you could go up high and just turn the motor off, and you could, you know, spend 10 minutes just gliding around. Anyway, we're down. So you could be well forgiven for thinking, is this guy qualified to review this? All he did was crash it. And the answer to that is, yeah, I make loads of mistakes, but the reason I don't edit around them and try and make myself look perfect is by making all these mistakes, I can see what I'm doing wrong, and therefore if someone gets it, hopefully they won't make the same mistakes. Of course there are some very avoidable ones that I did make. I noticed when I got back and looked at the manual, there was this thing that said the ailerons should be set to, well, it didn't say so much, it showed a picture basically showing that the aileron travel should have been 10mm. I would argue that that should be the same with elevator as well. So I found about 50% rates was about right and kept it nice and stable. Of course, one of my problems was I used this, the only radio without trim switches, which all other radios have, and I did that for a convenience point of view. This is ERS but has a semi multi-protocol module in it. It can do FreeSky. It's got one of the chips, I think it's a CC2150 or something. And I was also flying on that day another wing and a quad on ERS, and I don't have any radios that are multi-protocol. So rather take an ERS radio and a FreeSky radio, I tried to shortcut it, and I didn't realise this didn't have trim tabs, which is a bit silly. Don't do that, obviously. The only thing I wouldn't recommend doing what I did was running the little VTX and camera off the back of the ESC via the receiver. Although this worked fine for me, it's not going to be the same with every type of VTX and camera, and you may end up taking too much current from the back, and then the ESC will reset and you have all sorts of problems. What I would have wanted to do is putting a separate back that supplied its own voltage to the camera, therefore I would have been sort of safe there. I didn't have one, so I kind of took a bit of a shortcut, tested it out, and it was okay, but I'm probably at the limit of what that back can do, so best not do that. Again, for convenience sake, just getting that Zohd camera that plugs straight into that JST is probably the easiest solution there, because it was quite hard to find the right camera to make it fit in that little slot. Now, I weighed the whole plane with the LiPo and it came to 252 grams. And that's just over that magic 250 gram figure, but you know, I've got little adapters in like this, which probably weighs 2 grams. You could reduce the size of the LiPo. I was using an 800 milliamp hour 3S. You could go down to 750 and you'd be well inside that 250 gram thing. So after I got everything set up and correct, i.e. the trims and the rates, everything flew very nicely. As I mentioned before, my line of sight skills aren't that good, but I was able to fly this around nice and easily. It was very gentle because it doesn't go so fast, and at 50% it kind of just cruises around quite gently. It was really easy. It was quite easy to look at the orientation in the sky. If you couldn't tell where you were, you could just sort of move the stick a bit and you could see which way it would come. Because it wasn't going that fast, it didn't like shoot off into the next field at a rate of knots. And when we finally got the surfaces right, you know, it didn't react too quickly to what we were doing. My only problem on that particular day, it was much windier than we'd thought. So whenever I was flying towards myself, it would be with the wind and it would come a bit quick. So that's where you saw a couple of those whoosh, really fast turns, and occasionally going past myself and having to turn around. But if you get yourself a nice big field, preferably without trees and bushes and not such a windy day, you'll have a grand time. Now, obviously, before I did get things set up nicely, we crashed this thing a lot. It really did smack down sometimes, but there was absolutely no visible damage whatsoever. The only thing that happened, and unfortunately I didn't catch this on the camera because it was slightly out of shot when I was looking at it, is the little tab at the back here, this one, managed to go upwards and fold up on top of the fuselage. I'm guessing what happened is that flexed so much that was able to come out and go up the top there, and I had to unscrew the thumb screw, take the wing off, and then put the wing back on properly, and it was all good. But that was the only thing that happened. Despite being thumped down, cartwheeling and all sorts, everything else is absolutely fine. Obviously I've got a slight advantage there of having a field full of quite long grass, but the fact is this thing doesn't weigh that much, and so you don't get that kinetic energy to really smash things up. But I think it'd be a different sort of situation if you crashed it into a wall or concrete or stuff like that. So just think about your flying area if you're likely to put this down. This doesn't go back in the box as well as the Dart does. Obviously the wings come off, and that's how I tend to travel. I just keep the tail on and the spar, and I just take these guys off and pop them on at the field. Of course, if you're not going to use this for a week or two and you want the space back, it's like a 5-10 minute job to unscrew this, take that out, take this bit off and stuff. It's just not necessarily something I'd do at the field. I think I'd always put this together, at least to this point of view, before I went there, because it's just like you don't want to be in grass and a windy particular day and doing fiddly things. I think it's just easier to do it beforehand. But overall, I think it's a great little plane. It's been designed for beginners, and it really works there because it's not so fast. You've got plenty of time to steer it around and get the hang of orientating. It doesn't have the complexity of the 4th channel for the rudder, although generally speaking, when you think about a 3-channel simple plane, it's normally rudder, elevator, throttle rather than ailerons. So this has ailerons. So it's not quite as simple as it could be, but it's certainly simple enough to fly around. So although it's aimed at a beginner, I don't think you're really that limited. I think if you want to fly really fast or do aerobatics, you're going to outgrow this quite quickly. But if you want to cruise around and just look at the viewpoint, you can do stuff with this. Obviously we've added the FPV, but you could add a better camera, better VTX, you could add something like ERS, and you could take this off for quite a long distance, because even on that little 800 milliamp battery, after 20 minutes I still had more in there. I think you could get up to about 30 minutes. If you went the 2S route and used the Li-ion battery, that's even longer to get. So this thing will cruise around a long time, just won't do it very quickly. And obviously you can add things like an autopilot. This will fit the Zohd Copilot perfectly. You could certainly put other things in there like iNav if you wanted to, but path of least resistance seems to be putting the Zohd gear in. It will just fit quite nicely. Anyway, this has been the Zohd Drift Dark Breeze edition, and was kindly supplied by Banggood for review, so many thanks to them. And of course, if you want to check this out further, there are links down below where you can do. I hope that review's been helpful, and I will catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the
the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.